Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Hand of the Week. This is, of course, the series that's all about asking and answering succinct questions about how poker works using hands that I've recently played as examples. Today's spot is all about whether you should go ahead and make thin reopening value bets on the river like this one. Solvers will often frown upon such a play as it gives the out of position opponent a wide array of options that they did not have before and will often just want to go thicker for value for a bigger sizing. Can we make a case for this in theory? Can we make a case for this sort of bet exploitatively? Let's find out by first looking at how we got here. We have ace-8 of clubs in the big blind and we flat a 3x open at 200 regular tables on GG Poker. This looked to be a regular, but I wasn't totally sure, to be honest. And when the flop checked over to me here, I think it's pretty clear that we're just going to be building a big bet. Whenever you're building a value betting range, ask yourself, would I be tempted to bet thin, vulnerable hands for thin value and protection? And if the answer is no, as is the case here, where we're not betting pocket nines, pocket sevens, king eight, king queen, king jack, or anything like that, then you can just go ahead and polarize and build around a bigger sizing. Therefore, we go for a B75 here with ace-8. As I often say, the value hands are going to drive the bus, and very often the bluffs are going to be the passengers. Value hands dictate sizing first and foremost. Villain calls, and on the turn, it's much of the same story. We're not going to be wanting to double barrel here with weak ace-x like ace-3 suited or anything like that. We're not going to be betting anything like pocket queens because we don't have it and wouldn't have even bet flop with it. We don't have an 8 that we want to bet here, and so we're basically just going to be betting 2-pair plus with maybe a smattering of the very best ace-x, but I think mostly just 2-pair sets and straights. Therefore, our value range is still wanting to pot build. There's still enough urgency here that we want to get more money in the pot and facilitate that all in by the river in a roughly smooth fashion, and so we go for the slight overbet on the turn. My overbet when I'm barreling turn after a flop raise is typically a bit smaller than my overbet if I'm just betting the turn normally. Villain goes ahead and calls. The river is the 5 of hearts, visibly weakening our hand and making it thin to value bet again. My first instinct here was that it's bad to reopen action and we should probably just check a la solver. I haven't checked this one out in Pio yet, we'll do that in a second, but my guess is going to be that it does not like this thin in position value bet. This value bet opens the action most critically, and it doesn't do it with a ton of equity. When you're value betting in a very thick manner where your hand is really strong, you're going to be able to open the action with impunity because you're just getting enough good stuff by doing that it's well and truly worth it. However, when you're reopening the action for just a thin slice of value, it's a bit more precarious, right? Because you're giving your opponent the option to check raise the best blockers as a profitable bluff. You're giving them the option to win extra money from you by going all in with 7x and getting called sometimes by worse hands in your range. And you're just giving them more options than they had if you checked back. That's why I think this is probably not quite theoretically approved. But in reality, I had a think here and I decided that not too many people are going to turn hands into bluffs in this node, in this pool. And so maybe we can go ahead and value bet a little bit more thinly, bet fold, and get away with it. Let's take a look at the sim now. It did work out. We look like a genius at first value because villain has ace-5, and if we were watching this on some kind of cheesy poker show, no doubt the commentators would say, that's a genius value bet by the carrot man there, but I'm not so sure it is. Let's see what Pio thinks. Let's interpret the solution, and let's get to the bottom of whether this is too thin. So as we can see, our hand is a pure check in the solver. It's not at all happy with our play, thinking that in terms of EV, it actually costs us about a big blind. It's really hard to know whether this is okay in real life, but I'm just going to err on the side of saying that it's not, and I should just stick with my instinct to check back here. And I think the thing that's really instructive about this river strategy is that we are supposed to mainly just be using a 75% sizing. So even though the SPR is quite small, we're not really jamming on 4 straight rivers. And this is a useful theorem that when there's only one hole card needed to make the nuts, and that hole card is like kind of abundant in ranges, you're not normally going to be going all in or using giant overbets, because the minute you start to do that, the more you push the opponent's calling range almost solely towards that nutted one card straight or whatever it may be. So using the B75 here is kind of a nice way of saying, if it's worth reopening, it's only really worth it with something like a 7 or pocket 8s at an absolute minimum, and therefore we can go bigger. But because it's 4 straight, we can't go all the way up to the all-in sizing, and we're going to actually keep it under pot even at a low SPR. So this is nice here. It makes a lot of sense. I think with our hand, I just don't really have a strong exploitative argument for wanting to do this. I could see one pair just wanting to fold a lot, just thinking this is underbluffed when people go huge and then tiny or something like that. It does depend on the player. I think against some recreationals, this is a nice greedy thing to do and it's probably okay. But against someone that's trending more reggae, it's possibly not so good. Villain did snap in game, didn't really think about it, but then they did have two pair. It'd be interesting to see how they would maybe react with a hand like Ace Jack or Ace Queen or Ace King or any of these holdings that are calling the turn on this node here. The final thing I really want to note here in this hand is that this is a very, very high EV card for the big blind, the flop raiser. They're just all over this sort of run out, especially when they've raised flop and bet turn. They love the 4 straight river. This is a diabolical card for out of positions range, which means that they are just going to be folding a lot in general, and does mean that if we did get here with an air hand, let's say that we arrived with King 3 of spades or something, even though that's a busted flush draw and it has the dreaded spade blocker, we still want to be bluffing that hand because the fold equity is just going to be really high here. If we bet 75% of the pot here, they're folding 50% of the time instead of 43%, which would be around the MPF, the pot odds norm fold equity. And so it is the case that we can just go ahead and bluff with any low EV combo there, anything without showdown value, and just do better than we would by checking. But of course, that doesn't give us the right to just start value betting incredibly thinly unless we think it's over defended, and I'm just not so sure that it is. Overall then, despite the good result, despite being made to look like a genius and getting the praise of that televised poker commentator, this is just not a fantastic play. I'll be honest, guys, when I'm in game and I think I have a check back, but my hand looks really good, I sometimes fall into the trap of kind of overgeneralizing and thinking about things in too absolute a way. If you catch yourself thinking something like, it would be too weak to check back 2 pair on the river, that's a very good sign that you're being governed by one of these rogue thought processes that is stopping you focusing on the here and now and dragging you into like some general pattern that's far too vague to be the right level of specificity, to be the right thing to think about in this very unique individual hand. Hopefully this has been useful. Main takeaways are: build a big bet when you're checked to big blind versus small blind on ace high boards. You're really just betting pot pair plus for value. On the turn, if you have big bet on the flop, you will normally just be firing over bets and big bets on the turn as well. You wouldn't be sizing small there. And then on the river, if it feels like it's too thin, if it feels like it's one of these major earthquake rivers that's really shaking stuff up, you may have to adjust, recalibrate, and actually check back your former value bets on the street before, which were things like 2 pair, like ace 8 here, or maybe even a set of 4s. And then the final takeaway is 4 straight runouts are fantastic for the big blind aggressor after the flop. When the big blind's been raising, check raising, barreling turns, they're always going to like these low straighty runouts, and in many cases flush runouts as well. And that means that even if you do have bad blockers, even if you've got the King 3 of spades, you still have a mandatory bluff on a card that's much better for your range. Hopefully this episode of Hand of the Week has been useful, and I'll see you back here for episode 7. Bye bye.